Sorry, hello. It is August 2023. We are still on the track of making my Abit VP6 dual processor motherboard usable in the sense that it's running too slowly. Now, Abit VP6 is one of the famous motherboards of its time, which could be overclocked. In fact, there's a special menu to do that. And I never used to overclock, but hey, I'm about to do so now. I've got it into a state where I've actually doubled the speed of the entire computer, and that is pretty something. So I'm going to show you what I've done in case you too have a VP6 motherboard you would like to overclock. So we're powering on. We are pressing the power on button. We are waiting for some action. And I'm hitting the enter key. I've got a whopping 2 gigabytes of memory, but in all my testing, none of the operating systems that I've installed have got any faster because they weren't paging in the first place. Okay, so the overclocking menu is at the top. It's the soft menu 3 setup menu. So all we'll do is go into that. And by the way, if you change the settings so that the system doesn't work, as I understand it, I've not checked it because I've not blown the system up yet, it'll either reset automatically to a default setting which would allow the system to proceed, or I believe if you hold the insert key on your keyboard whilst powering on, it will do it. Anyway, so normally in this panel, the CPU operating speed is not set to user defined. It's set to the actual speed of the CPU, which in my case is 43366. So 66 is the clock speed, and 433 is the number, which is the clock speed times a multiplier. So in my case, the CPU that I've got, which is a 433 megahertz CPU, is fed from a 66 megahertz clock, and then because it's got a multiplier of 7, it ends up as 433. But instead of doing all of that, you can go up to this user define, which allows you to put in your own bus speed. So I'm now, instead of having, we've got 2 numbers here. We've got the first number, which is the clock speed that's going to be applied to the poor old CPU. And you can see it's double the value that it was previously. Let's see what values we can have. Now, the one thing about the Abit VP6, it's got a lot of flexibility here. So if I click on enter to choose, you can see that I have got numbers ranging from 66 megahertz, and then there's a number after that, I'll explain that in a second, all the way up to 150 megahertz. So what this is telling me is, let's go back, please don't let me lose the one that I had here. This is saying 133 megahertz is the clock speed of the actual CPU, and take that number and divide it by, in this case, 4, to give the bus speed of the PCI peripherals bus. So the cards you plug in need to be are working at a specific speed, and that speed is governed by the clock that's fed to the PCI bus. So whilst what I'm saying here is 133 megahertz is the megahertz being fed to the CPU, which is double what it would normally be. Divide that number by 4 and you get the 33 megahertz that's being fed to the bus, which in fact 33 megahertz is a regular number. So that should definitely work for the peripherals. The only question is my CPU able to be overclocked to that degree? And the answer is yes, mine is able to be. You can change this multiplier factor, but it doesn't make any sense because all Intel CPUs are actually locked. So depending on the CPU that you buy, you get a CPU clock which is fed into the CPU, and then the CPU internally just uses that multiplier factor, but that's set inside the CPU. So doing that will do nothing. I think this value here is just, you can incrementally increase the CPU clock. This is the front side bus, so you can just add a small increment. So it's currently set to 133. If I were to set that to 10, I would go from 133 to 143. I've not bothered with that. So when you increase these numbers, the other thing that you're going to have to increase are the voltages supplied to the CPU. And this CPU was not at 1.8 volts, it was at, I forget, but I think I bumped it up to I think it was at 1.5 or something like that. but I've pushed up the CPU voltage because unless you do that, the CPU isn't going to be able to go faster. So what I've done is I've started off with a lower number than 133. I started off with something like, I started off with things like 68, and then bus PCI speed is 68 divided by 2. Then I went up to 75, then I went up to 80, then 83. And you can just keep on going up. And then eventually I got to 133. So I'm happy with this. It's definitely nippier than when it was originally being used in my 2023 configuration. And I would say basically it's just twice as fast. So this is a fantastic way to speed up your machine. It's still running dog slow, but we've got components in the post. We are optimistic that eventually I will be able to make a decently speedy machine from the year 2000 in 2023. Thanks for watching, Diary.